now-ish. All right. Hello, everyone. Today is October 4th. My name is Jeff Sika. I work at the University of Michigan. I also help out in SIG-UI and Contribex, and I am this week's host of the community meeting. This is a special community meeting for two reasons. The first is Brendan Burns from the steering committee is here to announce the results of the steering committee election. And second, hopefully, not 100% sure, but Jace will be here to lead the 1.12 retro for us. Some housekeeping things first. As a courtesy, please keep yourself muted unless you are speaking. Remember, this is streamed and will be posted publicly on YouTube, so please be mindful that what you say is being recorded and will be in the permanent record forever. If there is anyone that would like to take notes in the Google Doc, that would be awesome. I will post the link unless someone beats me to it. Boom. The majority of time should be given to the retro this week. So right after I do shout outs, I'm going to give the floor over to Jace. That being said, is Brendan on the line? Yes, no, maybe so. Well,
doesn't look like it just yet.
Yeah. All right, well, we can instead do release updates first, and then when Brendan gets on, he can go afterwards. Aish, is it Aish? How do you?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right.
Hi, everybody. This is the 1.13 release update. So we kicked off the release on Monday, October 1st, and it's going through November, and the anticipated release date is the first week of December. Currently, it's December 3rd. I had sent out an update to the Kubernetes dev mailing list with the schedule and a few process changes that we are putting in place this time around. Both Kendrick and Kendrick is our enhancements lead, we've been meeting actively with SIGs to especially highlight that this is going to be a super short release given the 2 KubeCons and the various holidays that's in place. So we are encouraging the SIGs and the leads while planning their enhancement load for this cycle to keep the short time frame in mind and focus on more stability items, which could be landing things that got deferred in the previous releases, or working on those long-standing stability bugs, or increasing test coverage and making tests more robust. The formal feature collection will start on Monday, the 8th. And the ask for the SIG leads and enhancement owners here is to, if you want anything that's to go in the 1.13 release, please make sure you open a issue in the features repo and or update your existing issues with the milestone, priority, kind, and SIG labels. Yeah, and we'll communicate this more broadly as we go along.
Did you list the dates, Aish?
In which one?
For this release, for 1.13.
Yeah, the dates were as listed in the schedule in the email that's sent out on Monday.
Okay, sorry, thanks.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Aaron, for heaping the README in this chat there. So currently the code freeze is set for November 15th.
And just a quick ping or heads up there, 2 big-ish changes that hopefully don't have much impact. One is removing support for etcd2. We're trying to land the PR that does that right now, and I've stripped out all the jobs related to etcd2. Number 2 is moving to Go 111. That accidentally snuck in and uncovered a whole bunch of things that breaks, so that's going to take a little bit longer to land. But I just wanted to be big, bright, and bold about the visibility of those, since those have a wide-ranging impact. That's all from me.
Luckily, Bob let me know that I was muted. All right. If I missed it, I'm sorry, but also, did you mention 1.12.1 is planned for tomorrow?
No.
No, I did not mention that.
That was me. I just noted that because the email had gone out. There's a link to the KDev notice on that, but it's intended for tomorrow.
Awesome. All right, thank you. Are there any other release updates? All right, next up then we have Brendan Burns to let us know how the steering committee election went and give us the results.
Cool. Thank you. Everybody can hear me? Yes? Good. All right, excellent. Before we give the results, I wanted to just give a thank you to everybody in the community who got out and voted, and to Paris and George who helped organize. And I will say that turnout was about 50%. So we can do better, and I expect us to do better the next time around. So please, next time if the vote comes out, please remember to do so. And so then, without further ado, the steering committee people who will be serving for the next 2 years, there are 3 of them that we are electing, and they are Aaron Kirkenberger, Timothy St. Clair, and Devanam Srinivas. I hope I pronounced Devanam, otherwise known as Dims. I hope I pronounced his name right. And that is that. Thank you for everybody who voted, and thank you to everybody who put themselves up for candidacy. So that's it. And I'll take questions if there are any questions, but I don't know if there are.
All right.
All right, cool. And we will post up that to Kubernetes dev and everything else too.
All right. Congratulations, everybody. Next up, I'm trying to go through this quick so we have plenty of time for the retro. We have shout outs. Ben the Elder, shout out to MR Hone, Neolit123, Justin SB, and Liggett for each helping me in turn to track down a certain Kubernetes issue. This one was tricky to pin down, sweat smile. Paris gave shout outs to Justin Augustus. I cannot pronounce that. KRZYZACY, Mr. Bobby Tables, and Jiffy, filling in for George, for being mentors in our first episode of the October Meet Our Contributors. And Paris also gave shout outs to Brendan Burns, Timothy St. Clair, and SpiffXP for spending time with us and answering questions on the Meet Our Contributors this week, Kate's and Heart Eyes. And without further ado, Senlu, thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Without further ado, though, Jace, are you here?
I am indeed. So I'm just pulling up the retro doc here, and we'll get into that if we're ready.
I think it's all you know.
Cool, great. So I'm going to give a little background here, and also if anybody wants to look at the retro doc, it's bit.ly/Kates112-retro. I'll place a link in the chat so everybody has access to it, if not. And there we go. So I am super excited to be running this retrospective. This is, let's see, I've been doing this since 1.3, and Paris has filled in a couple times in between when I was release lead. So there's a long history of these being a key part of our community and the things that we do. So just a quick thing about what we're trying to accomplish here. One is just to give visibility to the community as a whole, that we're really serious about continuous improvement in all the big processes that we undertake. So the release process is one of the most defined, most comprehensive and important processes that we undertake. So there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of people, it's a lot to do. I do want to give a personal shout out to Tim Pepper, who is an outstanding release lead this go, and everybody on the release team has been thrilled to be on the team, which is always a good sign, and it's really exciting to see this tradition continue. So about the release retrospective process itself, one thing I do like to call out is that we have some working agreements when we go through these, and those working agreements are simply designed so that we preserve a really positive focus and make this meeting inclusive so that people feel like they can share their opinions and hopefully raise and surface concerns that can make the next release cycle better. And if you haven't heard, Aish is our next release lead, and that's super exciting. And so a lot of this will be for her to take into consideration in ways that she can adjust the process moving forward. So it's really important there. I would ask that everybody, if you have commentary or things that you want to share, please make it respectful. Please make it constructive and as positive as you can. And wherever possible, attack the process or the policy and not the person. So if you feel like somebody let you down, it's probably not necessarily something they did as much as maybe ways that we could have reinforced the process to be more supportive of their efforts. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the first part of the retro, which is really to talk about some of the things that went well and we should probably do again. So what I do is I call on the people who have claimed these items, and basically, if they're here, they'll speak to them, and if not, I'll be their advocate, and we'll go from there. So, Tim, looks like you've got the first item.
Yeah, one of the things that we tried to put a focus on back in June was trying to see if we could kind of cast a broader net on who we got involved in the release team, trying to get out of the Pacific North America time zone a little more. So we managed to actually get a few people from Asia and Europe, and I think at this point we can say that we actually have done that again. I think Aisha's got a set of folks both between the leads and shadows who are doing this. So I think it's a good trend we're starting there.
That's amazing. And I want to call out that this is an incredibly inclusive practice. And this is something I would like to see a lot of our SIGs also consider, especially if they have attendance from other parts of the world. So we are cognizant of how we schedule things for APAC and whatnot. So that's really great feedback.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
A big shout out to Tim for wrangling like 2 release meetings to be inclusive of all the folks. Especially the second one was at 6 a.m. Pacific time to accommodate APAC. Europe and APAC, which is great.
Yeah, for sure. Tim, you've got the next few items. Do you want to just riff here for a while?
Yeah, sure. So the next thing that was a notable change in this release was, I think going back to late spring, Caleb kind of did a shout out trying to see if we could push the branch manager role out of Google. It's one that historically has required a Google employee. And we got a volunteer from VMware, Doug McAckern, who stepped up to do that, and kind of knowingly that it was going to be some stumbling in public trying to figure out, and we worked through a whole bunch of kinks. There were things that weren't necessarily documented and changed, but I'd say we did it. We had a whole bunch of good new documentation on the process. There's a next iteration of things I think we can do there. But then the other really cool thing, in addition to that, we tried to make it a little bit more of a team to be more sustainable. We had our role shadows there, somebody in Europe and in Asia who also filled in for the branch manager lead because they had a week of vacation during the schedule. So they were also exercising the process and incrementally updating the documentation. So that was a really cool win, I think. And also those folks are carrying on to the next release to make sure that we have this solid. Documentation updates. One of the things that I am really passionate about is like doing what we say and saying what we do, and that comes down to having documents that are accurate. And we have a new set of role handbooks that have been thoroughly scrubbed for the different release team roles. I really appreciate the work that each of the leads and their shadows put into updating that documentation. And I think the next one of the set that was me, and this is actually less me than I would say Aaron, kind of a shout out to him. There were a lot of process reductions that we made in this release, kind of small things, but incremental improvements that were done pragmatically to say, hey, we could simplify things here, remove some redundant things, whether it's labels specifically or the processes around them, and then simplifying what we do operationally to make it more robust. So thank you, Aaron, for the work you've been doing there.
Yes, plus 1,000.
One thing I did specifically want to call out on that, because I don't really have a great way of measuring pain, but one of the things we specifically shut off is the bot that nags people to add a bunch of milestones and stuff to their issues and a bunch of labels to hopefully reduce alert numbness and at least stem some of the noise from hitting people's inboxes. I believe that caused some additional burden on the people on the release team who had to then go do in that, reminding themselves, hi Gwen, I see you waving. But I am hopeful that the community here felt like that was an overall good thing. So
I think it was an overall good thing, actually, because whenever I started poking people, they responded pretty quickly. I don't remember a time that I had to actually get Tim to bring out the big stick.
Right. Yeah, and that's the nobody paying attention to the bot notices thing is kind of troubling because like in order for this project to scale and grow, we do need to have bots help us or some level of automation help us in some form, but it's clear that was noise that nobody was really paying attention to. So thanks everybody for stepping up, and I hope that was a more pleasant, efficient experience for everybody. Back to you, Tim.
Excellent. And I think actually it might be Nick Chase on the next one. I don't know if Nick's around, but yeah. So the HackMD thing. I guess this is maybe something that we look at for the future as a way to do this, but a paid account. And yeah, it looks like Tim and then Aish and Tim. So Tim, why don't you cover your two things and we'll hand it over to Aish and then we'll move on.
Okay. So I think the first one we've more or less already covered. One thing that I tried to do, as I should mentioned, was instead of having a Monday release team meeting, do that, but also have one at a much earlier or later, depending on how you view it. It's all relative, right? But a secondary meeting on Tuesdays that enabled folks from other geographies to more easily attend, and to not necessarily make it a secondary meeting. Like, we went through what had been discussed the prior day, but we also went through new things that had happened, and that gave maybe a little more continuity. And it's an awkward model, but as others had mentioned, maybe something that SIGs can be trying to do as they expand out their membership and contributor base. But it takes some critical mass of people attending both meetings, even if it's just a lead and giving some continuity there. So we trialed that. I think it was successful, but it's also a significant amount of work, something to aspire to continuing though, if possible. And then the last one that was me. So we ended up delaying code thaw because we were delaying release due to some stability issues. And that was actually really nice in that it gave us a little more time to see CI signal on master branch and be carefully selecting what and when we pulled over into the release branch and getting extra confirmation of the CI results there. In the face of CI instability and flakes and slightly non-deterministic or sometimes highly non-deterministic test results, that really allowed me to gain more confidence in what I was seeing and understanding our hypotheses on whether we had fixes or not. And then I'll circle back to this and things that didn't work well, because there's a flip side to that coin. But I'll hand off to Aish now.
Cool. So big shout out to Cole, Aaron, and Tim for actually getting the submit queue moved over to tight this time. It was super well timed. Well, there's not always a great time to make such a broad change, but it was very well managed, communicated broadly. We had multiple follow-ups, and then it was executed really well. And Cole made sure that we didn't have any loose ends there. And him continuing as the test lead, test infra lead into 113, to just make sure everything still is fully migrated and solid there. So just wanted to give a shout out to the team there.
Excellent. Looks like Dims, you get the last one.
So we were able to, just as the part of when Tim was talking about being able to get non-Googlers to run the release process, we identified a lot of things like where do things go, where are the artifacts generated, how do the container images get cut, where do they get pushed to, what kind of signatures do they have, things like that. We did a lot more of that this time, which kind of made me happy. We moved from like SHA-1 to SHA-512 and things like that. So, and then we also identified a few things. We logged issues that we could work on the longer term. So I think that worked out well this time too.
Cool. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to things we should change. Looks like Hippie Hacker had something.
Would it be possible just to give a moment in case anybody else on the call who hadn't entered anything in the doc has something they observed?
Of course. There's always time for shout outs.
I have a tiny little thing to add. This is because of turning off the bot, grammar. I think, and because issues and pull requests no longer need to exist in pairs, it's become a little trickier to find bug issues that haven't been labeled correct, bug pull requests that haven't been labeled correctly, just because it's unclear if they relate to something in the release or if it's just, it's, so I'm working on it from the bug triage. I changed the documentation, the handbook for bug triage lead to just make sure to look out for that a little bit better for the next release. The other thing that I'm still working on is to update the pull request template to make sure that bug fix pull request is labeled as kind bug when you file such a pull request. We already do this. I am just really looking for a little bit more visibility.
Okay. And if you want to make a note of that in the retro doc, that would be super helpful.
Yes, I'm not. Yeah, I apologize that it's not in there. I will.
No worries. We just want to document it so it doesn't get lost in the sands of time. Hippie Hacker, you got some stuff in the chat. Do you want to speak to that real quick? If you can. You can just interpretive dance it. It's good. Okay, so we got it in the chat. It's also in the doc. So, all right, Tim, you're up next.
So moving on to things to change down
Correct.
below.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So Hippie put his note there, and I also captured it up above. And considering daylight savings time changes around how we manage alternate meetings or split meetings across time zones.
Cool.
Things that we should change. Features in the milestone, I think, continues to be a rough spot. And I know there's a lot of work going on here in SIG PM and SIG release around how to better this situation. I don't know how much more to say about that. I mean, there's discussions ongoing. If you're interested in getting involved with them, I guess I would give a shout out to people to go track that down. This is a big cross-project discussion.
Do you feel like there's a good best way to facilitate that discussion, or how would you like to see that handled?
Well, I think I have confidence in what you and Stephen Augustus seem to be doing. I think that's the right set of people are having the right discussions, getting the right stakeholders brought in. So I mostly call it out here is to say that getting an improvement there, some resolution, an incremental change, or I mean, there's also been talk of sort of a seismic change. Something for an improvement there, I think, would be beneficial to the release process to help us better understand what's coming at us up front.
Agreed. Okay. It looks like you've got the next several ones. Do you want to, and then essentially it'll partner up with DIMS on the manifest release images part. So if you can do the handoff once you're done.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess a specific aspect of the features, then depending on how the process for feature definition gets done as it hits the release team, we need a better sense of where things are coming in. As the splitting of the monolith happens and things are spread across more repos, typically the release team had only been tracking what was in KK, but there's going to be more and more that's not KK, and especially on those this cycle, we had a bit of confusion because we're trying to watch and track artifacts and see, did that code actually land? Where is it? And if it's not stated in the feature where it's going to be, which has been the case thus far, and some of those things that are split out, it's made it harder for us. The next one then, release branch tooling version control. We still have oddities around how we track dependencies and how we produce artifacts and the code that's used to produce those. And so, for example, the RPMs and debs is a specific one. If those spec files aren't kept in a branched fashion or having some sort of conditional logic within them, and you need to build new ones for some prior patch, but you've changed them to support or to require some newer thing, you get some odd skews there. So I think we need to consider either standardizing on one or the other. Do we branch and fork those and build old code updates with old scripting, potentially leading to some maintenance overhead if a common fix needs to go in both? Or do we standardize on some conditional logic within them, but we need to do that everywhere then, and there's a lot of tendrils to all of that.
I think that one is actually pretty easy.
Yeah.
We don't have to get into it too much now, but if we simply deprecate the spec files we have that exist outside of the Kubernetes monorepo, then we more or less get the spec files following the code for free, and you can always just go back. I think the challenge is that we've got multiple sources of truth, and which is always leads to challenges.
Yeah. The next one I think I captured more on DIM's behalf, manifest release images, and DIM's and also Tim St. Clair, if there's things that you would like to say there, I think you can say them better than I can.
So it ended well, but that was the good part of it, but it caused a lot of chaos in the. So we are using some tooling from Docker CLI, which is not fully GA yet. So for generating the manifest, so that was causing some issues because there were a whole lot of images that we needed to build manifest for, and there were some pull requests that were in the K release repository that didn't get enough attention till the end. So that was that caused a little bit of back and forth on do we make the changes in kubeadm to make sure that everything uses manifest or not. So we went back and forth there towards the end, but then we were able, since Doug M was able to try mock releases, that was a huge help in being able to get past that problem. At the last minute, we were able to pull the trigger and get that working, and then the kubeadm. So as part of this, I also want to mention that the two RC1 and RC2 turned out to be really good because we actually found problems. Both people were able to try RC1 and RC2 and they filed bugs, and we were able to patch. We were able to catch things before the actual release went out. If we had a little bit more time, we would have caught the Sonoboy bug too. But then, let's leave it for another day. We are trying to figure out a way to fix that problem now in another way. But yeah, so the manifests, so far so good. Even after the release, we haven't found any new bugs being filed against the manifests so far. So cross my fingers.
Super awesome. Thank you for that great feedback. It's always nice when you start with, it turned out well. Sometimes we're not so lucky. So thank you for everybody's efforts on that. That's a big deal. So let's go ahead and hit the Inigo, which it looks like a lot of people are on this, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. I guess I can speak to it because I saw it from the top level, and it's something that Doug and I should wondered about, but then also the shadows, Young Lee and Hannah's there on branch management. So Onigo and GCB are the tools we use for creating build artifacts. And that's obviously a special privileged operation from a security perspective. But so we try to limit who has access, but as best I understand, it's sort of binary. You have access or not. And trying to spread this out a little bit more into a team role, I think it would be useful to see if there are things that we could do around enhancing that, making it a little bit more nuanced, and at least giving a few people the ability to have read access and tail logs and things like that, and collaborate on debug a little easier for some of these build issues that we were starting to work through, and some of the trial things that Doug was doing that Dims had just mentioned. There's a lot of copy paste going back and forth across Slack, and if we treat it more as a release engineering team or a build team in support of a process, I think the idea of giving easier access to those logs would be beneficial.
Right. In general, the one thing I wanted to point out here is that when we trigger some of these things, we should automatically capture the log and put it somewhere where everybody can see it. So it's there as a record also. So it's not we don't have to copy paste stuff.
It would be good to capture that somewhere in our doc as an action item, I think, because that would be super useful.
Quick question. Is the item here giving broader read access for folks outside the branch manager role or the release lead role? Or
like a couple things have to happen there. The way we're storing the logs and streaming them now, we're kind of using the default of how Google Cloud Build works. We actually need to go ahead and create a proper storage bucket and service account to open up these. So like there's a little bit of work that needs to happen otherwise, or so people can follow along the logs more generally. We also need to actually audit what the Anago output is at some point to make sure that's safe. But right now, all the logs, they're streamed to a bucket in GCS that only people who are able to write to that bucket can access, and that should be fixed.
Yeah, thanks, Caleb.
Is it easier to fix that in place, or is this something that is more effectively addressed as we look to migrate this infrastructure over to the CNCF-owned Google account?
We should fix it in place probably first anyway. That will also allow us to reduce the perms required to be a release manager because right now, so we need to fix it in place first anyway.
Okay.
We'll follow up with that later.
Yeah, the only other thing here was I think there are some of the buckets where we stage the container images. We were not able to look at the images that were pushed there. Only a few people could do that. So if we can make read capabilities available on the staging repository, that would be good too.
Cool. And thanks whoever's putting stuff in the document to help track these things. Aaron, it's an interesting point you have here about the release team.
I think we jumped right over CI signal status tracking if Tim wanted to talk about that first.
Yes, we did. Tim.
Yes, CI signal. This is always a balance between, in the face of instability potentially in CI signal, how much debugging do you do before you formally open an issue to track versus immediately open an issue to track? And I feel like in the cycle we went a little too far in the direction of maybe being a little passive or waiting to see can we get tomorrow's results or the next result to confirm was this real or not. And we needed to actually be more aggressive and get an issue open to formally focus eyes on the status.
So just for what it's worth, I have lots of additional opinions on this and how to fix it. But one of the key underlying problems is that this is a great job to automate away. It's not like we necessarily need a human to read all the magic incantations on test grid to then walk through and decipher from the logs whether or not something is really, really, truly a failure. That takes a lot of time and that doesn't scale terribly well. But unfortunately, we have tried in the past using tools like the triage dashboard to identify clusters of failures and then auto-filing issues based on the top 20 of those. Those got flat out ignored. So there does need to be some sort of happy medium where I think the tools better assist a human in reaching out and making sure people are aware that something is happening. I have a number of efforts ongoing that I would like to do to address that as part of this release cycle that I will have to dig up links for and link in the actions to be taken below. But one of the big ones is going to be to define a set of big queries that we can use to define SLIs, SLOs, whatever you want to call them, for jobs being quote unquote flaky and quote unquote continuously failing and not actively maintained, and then find ways to reduce the set of jobs and test failures that we have to watch to ones that are actively maintained. So this will include making sure that jobs have owners and that people are responsive so that we know who to poke to get things fixed, and making sure that we have like less signal and surface area that we have to cover in general. So I will document those AIs later. Okay, so then next, I'll move on if there are no other comments on that. The next issue I have, I hoped to have something more fully scoped here, but basically I have real concerns that there's this massive group team of people who get together to bring the .0 release out the door, and then the entire team dissolves, and it is left to one single person to carry the weight of all of those responsibilities for every patch release going forward. This means taking a look at whether or not this is actually a bug fix or a feature or a regression sneaking in. This includes filling the role of CI signal, which I just described as difficult. This includes doing all the responsibilities of a release lead, which means getting in touch with people, communicating. This includes making sure that the release notes are sane. This is an awful lot for one single person to do. And there have been occurrences in the past where some things have slipped through the cracks. And I really think it is important for our reliability and stability to make sure that we have a team of people, not just one single person. At a minimum, it has to be 2 people. It should probably be more than that. And I think Tim Pepper agrees with this to the point where that's why he wants to step up to be the patch release manager for 113. But I would also say, like, if we find that the 112 patch manager is burdened, that should not prevent us from spinning up some additional people to help them out now, today.
So just a note for the 113 team, we actually have 2 patch release managers now. So that's a start in the right direction. The SIG release charter is coming soon, which will include a bunch of definitions for subprojects. One of which will be the release engineering team, and patch release will be part of that.
And here is also a place where it definitely appears that the entire team dissolves, but there, I guess in my experience, there's been kind of a unofficial patch release team, which consists of all the previous, at least at Google, all the previous release managers and branch managers and people who have been involved in the release. So I have helped to route requests and do some cutting work when people in other time zones are unavailable. There is a team, but it would be nice to have an official patch release team rather than just a unofficially staffed group of people.
Right. We cannot have heroes staffing our patch releases. Like, that just guarantees tribal knowledge and things slipping through the cracks, and that is unacceptable for patch releases going out the door. So I agree that there are probably a lot of people doing a lot of great work, but we actually need to build confidence in our users, in our community, by documenting and making transparent how all of this is done so that we can identify the gaps and fill them.
Especially if we have to go to a LTS model at some point, we'll need more people covering for more periods of time. Rather than the 9 months now, it'll be a year at least for everybody who signs up for one of these roles.
Right. That's all I have to say on that. I will hand it back over to Tim for the next item.
Thanks, Aaron.
So I think this next one is one that's been a problem in the past, and I do think we're on a better path for it. But the general area of how clusters are set up and upgraded, and what our test coverage reflects on that, especially the release blocking ones. So there's the cluster subdirectory that's got various things in it. There's obviously Qubit ADM up and coming. We also have some COPS AWS testing in the mix. But this is only going to get more complicated as cloud providers are being split out of tree, and we have the monolith splitting. So somehow I believe we need to incentivize vendors, make it easier for them to add to the test matrix, but make sure that the additions are done in a way that gives some coherent sense of readiness to the release team in terms of cluster creation and upgrade across the set of platforms there.
Yeah, I wanted to invite Tim St. Clair here about the problems they had with Kubernetes Anywhere, and just getting tests green was such a huge challenge this cycle. Tim, do you have a few minutes?
My audio is cutting out
Okay.
when I'm hearing people, so I'll try to talk and hopefully people can hear me. So Kubernetes Anywhere is kind of like woefully maintained, and we've used it as a default provisioner for kubeadm. I've been talking with 2 separate groups to get a separate provisioning set of tools in place for kubeadm. One is to get the Cluster API AWS implementation in place, because that gives us 2 signals. One is AWS, the other is a highly available deployment of kubeadm in place, but it's still, that would be in an ideal world for 113. The second of which is trying to loop back in the kubespray folks into SIG cluster lifecycle to have them set up a provisioning tool using kubeadm as the default backend. So we're working on all fronts to get these other signals in place. I don't know if they will all land for 113, but we're making an effort to try and make that happen.
Great.
Thanks, Tim.
Right. Tim, have you got the next one?
Scale testing, our quarterly friend. This one comes up in every release nearly. Scale testing is hard. Scale debugging is very hard. You run into fascinating bugs. But I do wonder now that testing is shifting from Google to CNCF, if it might be possible for others to contribute, because some aspect of this is funding. If you're running a whole bunch of huge tests, that could give us better data, but it comes at more expense. Right now, if the tests are running less frequently because they're huge and long running, but also expensive, I think it's an area where we could do better. And in this release, I would say every other release on average, we end up with some sort of a critical late issue and scalability that we have to sort out. And again, that causes a need for heroics. And if we could find a way to get better CI signal earlier on that, that would be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, sorry, I have something to say on this too. I'm talking a lot, but the one thing is the number of people who are paying attention to the scale tests. Right now, it's just folks from Google. So we definitely want people from other, other companies that are using the fruits of the scale testing to actually staff the work that is being done, in addition to trying to set up tests on other platforms, because it will need a full-scale crew to go through the whole cycle of getting the tests to, it's a full-time job.
Yeah, I didn't say that explicitly, but as I was kind of saying, like, these are hard problems that get hit. Like, yeah, it's not just funding for testing, but you have to have engineering manpower seriously behind diagnosing and fixing.
Right. And the other one on the flip side is we don't plan some things really well. For example, the core DNS one, we try to sneak it in towards the end, and we should try to do it really early in the cycle, so we don't have to make the scale team work so hard. So if there are things like that which we know are going to cause issues, we should try to schedule them earlier in the cycle.
Yeah, and also, going to the CI signal, noticing these things early on and raising the priorities / following up aggressively early on will also help, I feel, because we kind of tried to land all of that a little late.
So this is one of those areas that is actually explicitly spelled out in SIG Scalability's charter, where if they find that somebody has checked in something that produces a noticeable performance regression, they have the ability to block all subsequent merges from landing. I think we added this ability to Tide to support that. but I don't know how often it's been used. And one of my big concerns with that superpower is that the tests that they run are often read. I mean, they're passing if they interpret them by reading the appropriate tea leaves in the logs, but they're read. And a lot of our like alerting infrastructure and signal infrastructure can't really differentiate between more than green and red. And so I don't really have them in front of me, but I am pretty sure that leading up to the release, the 5,000 node tests were almost perpetually red. It never looked like we were actually in the green and meeting our performance thresholds according to the same dashboards that we look at for all of the other scalability jobs. There's also questions about whether or not we could catch these kinds of regressions earlier with more frequent, slower scale tests. So you may have noticed we run KubeMark, which simulates a large cluster on every PR. We run 100 node clusters against every PR. We also run 2,000 node tests, but those are not on the CI signal board. And so it's unclear to me how much SIG scalability is actively watching this stuff. So yes, I agree. It's been a problem child with all the things, and I just continue to insist upon the brute force solution of why don't you have your tests always failing so we know when, why don't you have your tests go back to passing all the time so we know when they fail and then we can do something about it accordingly.
Does this sound like an issue of just human resources and SIG scalability as well? I'm hearing that there's only a few people with eyes on the correct things. And I'm hearing it's mostly Google or only Google, yes? Is there, I mean, we can't force anyone to participate, obviously, but is there possibly some way, I'm speaking from a contributor standpoint here.
So
how can we talk to people and make them aware?
So we have support for any company to submit any results they would like to Google Cloud Storage buckets, and we will include them in the same set of test grid dashboards that we show for everything else. There is today nothing stopping from any of the major cloud providers from running their own version of the 5,000 node tests, other than them being willing to pay the money to provision 5,000 nodes and have them run for what currently looks like about 17 hours. And I can't speak to the specifics for Google, but it certainly seems like it causes some like capacity problems, or it's just like it's a large enough thing that we can't treat it the same way we treat all of our other jobs where we can pull any old thing off the shelf and schedule them any old place we would like to. So I would put that question back on anybody who wants to spin up like 5,000 nodes. We are happy to work with you. But again, it's like you're going to have to make, yeah, AWS is involved. I've noticed AWS has been involved in SIG scalability for a while. So it's just that like we can't, those of us who work at Google can't troubleshoot the intricacies of scale that you hit on AWS at 5,000 nodes. And similarly, I don't think AWS engineers could troubleshoot whatever scalability concerns come up if a 5,000 node cluster was spun up in Azure. But we absolutely have the support for people who are willing to periodically run jobs that spin things up in their clouds, using their infrastructure, using their cluster providers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I wasn't, that's good to hear. I wasn't saying that there was no support. I just, again, I think it's possibly potentially a visibility thing where we can, or we could, perhaps there's room to shake down more people just by making them aware rather than, because it sounds like if the infrastructure is there, that's great, but perhaps people are just not thinking about it that way.
Yeah, definitely we need to call it out. Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
From a Contribex perspective, one of the things that we've been trying to do is standardize a little bit of the information that comes in the SIG updates during this meeting. And it would be really awesome in the next SIG scalability update here to see some plans, specifically how the SIG is working to scale their involvement.
So SIG scalability just had an update, I think 2 weeks ago or so. So we won't see one for a quarter maybe. I think we're all saying the same stuff, and that it's not just, it's staffing and it's money and it's the want to be able to do it. So like, who of the big ones are willing to do it is the real question.
Right.
We
and
have a
we'll
question
allocate
now.
the staff to be able to.
So one of the tricky things about this, and this is something that maybe we can approach as a community, is long running and large scale tests are, because of the way cloud providers operate, often subject to non-deterministic failures. So if we can figure out how to solve for that a little better, that might help these tests be more effective. So there's probably things that we can chip away at that will help the test suite be more effective. And that's something that doesn't necessarily require you know, a specific cloud provider effort. It's really about making the test better at handling things like that. So
I just want to represent AWS here a little bit in the discussion. We've just started our active efforts on cleaning tests first, which I will acknowledge is a mess from an AWS standpoint. And we are getting involved with scale testing, but it will take some time for us to get to the level that Google is at. So I don't want to set expectations that are unrealistic. We have to clean up tests first. We are doing that in SIG AWS subprojects. As we integrate end-to-end testing, COPS has taken some load from us. We will also clean the 5,000 scale tests with Aaron in SIG scalability. And I'm just saying that we need probably another release cycle before we can have better output to show the group here.
Right. But I also wanted to bring out something that is prevalent in our community, which is we always say, oh, if you want to do something, just scale up a new cluster. We don't talk about having a large cluster and, you know, feeding it, like doing upgrades and things like that. We always say, oh, just spin up a new cluster and don't worry about the old cluster. So that kind of like, you know, goes against this model where we are saying, okay, have a large cluster and divide it in namespaces and then do multi-tenancy, and then yeah, so that's another thing that we need to watch out for, and you know, try to tell people, no, you should be able to do this too.
I kind of want to punt this discussion off to SIG scalability for follow-up, because it's not, I'm using 5,000 nodes as like a rough swag here, but there are specific limits for all the different kinds of resources. It's actually this weird like 8-dimensional hypercube of a volume that describes the bounds within which Kubernetes cluster can perform well. So it's a really subtle problem. And if you're interested in talking more about this, I think that's the forum. Just in terms of action items, like we are ready and willing to support those who are willing to commit in resources to it.
yeah, that's good. So we are getting close to our time window. I want to continue. So Aaron, you got the next one, and subsequent comments. Can we might have to, we're going to have to probably schedule part 2 during the SIG release meeting. But let's go ahead and keep going as long as we can, if that works for everybody. Aaron, I think you've got the next one.
I am muted. Sorry, I lost my place. So, okay. So, boy, our upgrade tests are kind of a fun thing in general, but I find that pretty much every release that I have been involved in since 1.4, people are perpetually asking, wait, which version are we upgrading from? And which version are we upgrading to? And did the fix that I merged in the release branch actually make it into this cluster that we just ran the test for? So one of the things I did was update add a guide to the CI signal handbook that describes like all of the different ways you can look at this. And then there's a known issue where like test grid and some of our other infrastructure just we don't parse both versions of the clusters out and then put them in a place that is machine readable. So I would like to work on that this quarter so that you can like look at test grid and very easily see what is the commit that you're upgrading from, what is the commit we're upgrading to. Right now you kind of have to dig into logs and stuff, and I described how to do that. I think Tim Pepper found that really useful as we got into burn down. That's all I have there.
Just a quick follow-up. This should have actually gone in things that worked very well. Thanks a lot, Aaron. That is like super useful. It helps all of us walk through and answer a lot of questions. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Tim and Zach, if you're around.
So documentation again around features as we split things out from KK. We had a number of features where, in addition to trying to understand, did the code land, we're trying to understand, should documentation land, did it land? And a number of them, we had this feature we were tracking, we couldn't find the code, oh, it's elsewhere in another repo. Okay, fine, it's done, yes, it's done. What about the docs? We don't need docs for that. And I got a sense across a couple of these that this leads to a potential oddity from a user perspective. If you're looking at the Kubernetes website, but a whole bunch of the new features for the new release aren't documented there, they're elsewhere, this federation and docs becomes a little weird as a user experience thing. So it's something that we should be thinking about what the core documentation needs to cover.
Yeah, at least for 113, when I talk to the other out of tree repos who are planning for some changes, I'm actively asking if there's any docs or release notes that need to go with it. But yeah, again, putting this somewhere in the set of questions, tying back to the feature questionnaire that you were referring to them, this would be useful to track more rigorously.
Tim, it looks like you're kind of co-conspirator on the next several things. Do you want to just go until we run out of time?
Yep. Yeah, this next one,
as needed.
This next one might be the one that runs us out of time, but dependencies and versions and the release notes. This is always a late breaking pain point in the release, trying to collect these. If you look at the change log, I should have actually linked it there. And maybe a couple of the prior ones. We started with a list of dependencies, and the next release gets bigger, the next release it gets bigger. We're starting to look a whole lot more like a distribution in what we declare we have tested or are supporting, and one needs to stitch together a cluster. But that set of information is culled together by hand from 100 different places in the code where it's referenced, and we really need an automated way of tracking at that. And it showed up in this release. I mean, one of the very first things that people were hollering about needing to get fixed for 112.1 was that specific list. It was incorrect. So as long as it's manual and it's split across a bunch of different sources of truth, it's going to be error prone, and we're going to make mistakes. And yeah, we need to do better there. And we also have somebody or a couple of us who are kind of looking at what we might improve there for the next release. Betas and RC releases. Dims, I think, has mentioned this already. I don't know how much more needs said there, but
the only thing I wanted to add here is this time we were able to figure out a way to download the deb and to actually try it out. So we threw out a couple of scripts that people could use. So yes, it's possible to do that. We just have to make sure that we have the debs where they don't get commingled with the shipped artifacts under stable, which was a problem we had with one of the betas or RC, I think.
And to make it clear, the goal there, if we do this better, we'll get, or we presume we'll get more adoption, early sniff testing on betas and RCs, which gives us more feedback and time to address issues noted before the release instead of being after the release.
Right. So the only thing I could ask here is, let's make sure that we factor in some time for RC1 and RC2 for this release.
And that's a challenge with everything in the schedule. Aisha, I don't know if you want to briefly talk to that.
So the timing between, I think we still have about 2 RCs for this. Is the concern the timing between the RCs, Tims?
Two RCs is fine, unless we run out of time and we need to squish them in, right?
Yeah.
And even if it's on a Friday, we should just make sure that we cut an RC.
Least,
right?
Yeah. I am still having 2 RCs there, but yeah, it all depends on how things, we have to play it by the ear at that time.
Exactly, right.
So should I go ahead and stop there or carry on to one?
Yeah, feels like a good place. Let's go ahead and make a demarc in the thing where we're stopping, and pick up the rest in the next SIG release meeting and go into more detail. So community members who have stuck around for this retrospective, thank you so much for listening and watching. Super important to have you involved, and hopefully you see that the release team is the best way to learn everything about the project and for new contributors to get involved. So please feel free to join SIG release meetings. All the release team meetings are public and welcome attendance. So on behalf of the Kubernetes community and the behalf of the user community in the world, thank you, release team, for everything that you did, all the time and the diligence and care, and most importantly, preserving the trust and and value that we deliver to our community. That's a huge and important duty, and a very solemn one. And you did it with incredible care and expertise. So thank you all, truly. So I'm not sure if George is still on or whoever's hosting. I got in a little late.
That'd be me, but
Hey,
I mean,
Jeffrey, sorry.
No, that's fine. I think you pretty much summed it up. It's a good place to stop.
Great.
So,
all right, everybody.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Do my best Aaron interpretation. Happy Thursday, everybody.
That's all right.
Happy Thursday.
Later.
That is
Happy
Aaron.
See y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.